I'm a member of the Middlesex-London Food Policy Council, and I'm joined tonight by two other MLFPC members, Colleen Kreniken and Lella Bloomer, who are co-hosting here with me. The MLFPC is also co-hosting with the London Environmental Network, and we'd like to extend a very big thank you to Deepika Giri for all the creative and technical support for this event. If you're experiencing any technical difficulties, please feel free to just pop your question into the chat or send it to Deepika, who's on here as London Environmental Network host, and hopefully we'll be able to troubleshoot that for you. All right, and then lastly, thank you to the breakout room facilitators, a couple of LEN members who've joined us and who will introduce a little bit closer to the breakout room component. So we'd like to begin this evening by acknowledging that the land and the urban agriculture activities we're discussing tonight are located on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabeg, Haudenosaunee, Lenape-Wauk, and Attawandaron peoples on lands connected with the London Township and Sombra Treaties of 1796 and the Dish with One Spoon Covenant Wampum. With this, we respect the long-standing relationships that Indigenous nations have to this land, as they are the original caretakers and continue to be stewards of the land. This region is incredibly rich in natural resources, and as we discuss land and urban agriculture this evening, we ask that we do so humbly with an open mind, reflecting on the impacts of settlers and colonialism on this land and Indigenous nations. Thank you. So tonight we are going to be learning and discussing about ways that we can make urban agriculture easier here in London, including a presentation from Chuck Parker at the City of London about a report titled Making Urban Agriculture Easy, Creating an Enabling Policy and Regulatory Environment for Urban Agriculture in London. So Deepika, I wonder if you could just put the link to the report in the chat to make it easily accessible for people. And we also, throughout the event, we wanted to share a few short clips of different kinds of urban agriculture that's happening in the city as a way to give you all a look at some examples, really cool initiatives that are taking place here in London. There are, of course, lots more as well that are occurring that we weren't able to feature. So please feel free to share in the chat about any projects that you are a part of as well. So Deepika, I'll pass it to you to roll the first video of the Western University Community Garden.
So here I am in EnviroWestern's community garden. There's lots of things growing. Tomato plants are absolutely huge. We had some peas here. We have melons and squashes and basil and oregano and cilantro and eggplants and peppers and cucumbers. And most of this stuff this year has been grown by myself, because the community garden is in its infancy and we didn't have too many people decide to, well, they didn't really know about the community garden, so they couldn't really come here and request to have some planters to grow food for themselves. But the goal is that in the future, students will be able to kind of rent out planters and they'll be able to grow their own food moving forward. So that's essentially why this garden was built, was so that people from the Western community could come here and grow their own food and learn to grow their own food and have access to local food, and also come here and get a sense of community, because with the pandemic we haven't really been able to access that, which is so important to us.
Yeah, so we really were excited to share this example that's happening at Western, completely student-led initiative. The person speaking in that video, Nadine Castonguay, was the student who really led the development of this project. Enviro-Western is a student-led group focused through the University Students' Council. And they had a much smaller community garden in the past, but wanted to kind of expand upon that vision and make it more community oriented for other students to rent out space. And they've also donated some of the fresh produce to London Food Bank. So this is the first year that their bigger space there is operating, which is very exciting. And we have one more video clip to share at this point, which is from the London Food Bank. Yeah, so again, it is the first year for this project as well at the London Food Bank, the gardens and the greenhouse. There's a lot more information as they continue to grow that's being put on their website and social media. We'd encourage you to check out. The greenhouse is expected to grow 15,000 plants, which amounts to about 4 tons of food. So it's a really huge initiative, really important to be providing fresh food at the food bank. And it's also run in a very sustainable manner, using projects like vertical growing, like the green wall here, where they're growing greens, as well as low carbon technologies, low resource intensive, some really unique and innovative ways to conserve water. Also hydroponics. So it's quite a very cool initiative to see and to learn more about. And then the food bank also has a new project that's just taken off recently this year and set to expand next year, which is their greenhouse project to get more greenhouses into communities. So greenhouses that would be managed by community projects through partnerships, where some of the food that's grown in the greenhouses goes back to the food bank and some of the food would stay in the communities that are operating them. So that is in partnership with the new Community Food Depot. All right. And I'll pass it off to Colleen now. Thanks.
Thanks, Jessica. Hi, everyone. My name is Colleen, and tonight I have the honor to introduce our guest speaker, so Charles Parker, also known as Chuck. So Chuck is a senior planner in the Long Range Planning and Research Station of the Planning and Development Division in the City of London. He has over 36 years of planning experience with the regional municipality of Hamilton Wentworth and the City of London. Charles is currently involved, among other projects, in the advancement and implementation of the council-approved urban agriculture strategy, which we'll be learning more about tonight. Chuck is the city staff resource person for the Urban Agricultural Steering Committee and the Agriculture Advisory Committee. Charles was born and raised in London and received his master's degree in geography, urban geography and planning at the University of Western Ontario in 1984. So we'd like to welcome Chuck, and whenever you're ready, you can share your screen and get started with your exciting presentation.
Okay, thank you, Colleen. Can everybody hear me? Good. This project started in the early part of the year, and it's part of a long-term effort by the city to implement the urban agriculture strategy. The urban agriculture strategy was approved by council in November of 2017, and it includes a wide range of initiatives centered around growing, food distribution, education, and all sorts of different criteria. Urban agriculture, as we see it, is the practice of growing, processing, sharing, and distributing food in the city. And it's an important component of the city's social, cultural, educational, economic, and ecological systems. It's in conformity with council's strategic plan with regards to strengthening our community, building a sustainable city, and growing our economy. Now, we've heard the term agriculture before. Urban agriculture, as we see it, is all the agriculture that occurs within the city's urban growth boundary. There is rural agriculture, which occurs outside the urban growth boundary, but we see urban agriculture as that which occurs within the city urban growth boundary. It tends to be smaller in scale, is less intensive or land intensive, and is less mechanically inclined. As I said, the urban agriculture strategy involves sort of the growing, the processing, the distribution, the education, and so on. And the city is a partner in this whole process. The urban agriculture strategy was sort of initiated by the urban agriculture community because they saw some need to develop a way to encourage urban agriculture within the city boundaries. And the city, as part of the strategy, agreed to partner with different groups that wanted to forward the urban agriculture agenda. So as I said, the strategy was approved by council in November 2017. As I said, it focuses on growing, processing, distribution, food loss and recovery, and education and connection. This particular project focuses on the growing component of the urban agriculture strategy. So it involves growing on vacant lands, underutilized lands, vacant buildings, rooftops, and converted shipping containers. We're also looking at the growing in parks and city rights of way. We're looking at that as a way of, in the long term, of allowing opportunities to grow food in other areas. For this particular project, we're focusing on London Plan amendments and zoning bylaw amendments that would allow growing within the city. Growing in parks and city boulevards is something that we're going to look at a future date, but we're not considering it at this particular point in this process. We have done previous projects in the past as part of our work program in the planning division. We try and identify a couple of different projects every year related to urban agriculture that we will forward and process. In the last couple of years, we've done a couple of projects related to the distribution component. So we've identified opportunities for farm gate sales as part of an urban farm. We specifically rezoned 21 Norland Ave to allow retail sales of farm products on that property. And we've also broadened the definition of household sales, the former garage sale definition, to allow you to sell vegetables and produce produced on your property as part of a household sales on your property. So the city is initiating this particular London Plan and Zoning Bylaw Amendment process to look at ways to change the London Plan and Zoning Bylaw to allow the growing of food more frequently and broadly. So the focus on this particular project is the London Plan and Zoning Bylaw amendments. In the last meeting we held with your group, we talked about possible amendments to the streets bylaw, the parks and recreation bylaw, special events manual, so on and so forth. But at this time, we've sort of narrowed our scope to only include those sorts of London Plan amendments and zoning bylaw amendments that would allow the growing of food more easily within the city. As you may recall, John Fleming was acting on behalf of the London Food Bank. He was helping them to forward their project for a greenhouse on their property, as you mentioned in the previous presentation. And he is currently working with them to sort of advance that project. And that's one of the things that we're working on as part of this, is to allow greenhouses more widely within the city and to make it easier to allow greenhouses both in residential areas and in sort of commercial / industrial / institutional areas. As part of that process, he prepared a background study and draft London Plan and Zoning Bylaw amendments for consideration. Those were forwarded to the Planning and Environment Committee at the end of June of this year. And those are now out for circulation, and you have been circulated on those. And I think that's part of the report that's attached to this particular presentation. So as the background study pointed out, the current London Plan policies and zoning bylaw regulations of the city are not clear on where growing is allowed at the present time. There are other sorts of processes and documents that do impact the growing of food, which we are not intending at this point in time to change, but maybe looked at as part of a longer term process. So we're talking about the Ontario Building Code, the Streets Bylaw, the Parks and Recreation Bylaw, and the Special Events Manual. They're all administered by others, and at this point in time, we're not looking to change those, but we are in constant discussion with those groups to sort of see if there's any avenue to change those regulations or policies to allow the growing of food more easily. There are a number of things that the city has to consider as part of these amendments if we do proceed forward with them. We have to take in potential land use impacts, odor, traffic, health and safety concerns, the undermining of other planned uses, impacts on natural heritage and hazard lands, and finally, the cost of ongoing maintenance. We have gone through a fairly comprehensive process to date. We have made presentations to yourself and others at the early part of this year. We sent out public notices. We've held internal meetings with other divisions of City Hall just to talk about what potentially we could do to make it easier to grow food in the city. As I said, the previous information report was sent to our Planning and Environment Committee at the end of June. And the part of the process that we're in now is we're circulating the information report and holding meetings and providing opportunities for input with various groups, both internally and externally to the city. And we're looking for their comments on the draft amendments that were circulated. We're looking at, originally we had indicated that we were going with a report to pack at the end of September. We've now extended that a bit just to allow extra time for people to comment. So we're looking mid-October for a public meeting on the recommended amendments at the Planning and Environment Committee. So there is a little bit of extra time. So if you have any comments, we would appreciate them by the end of August. You can do it either as a group or you can do it individually. We're quite flexible on how we receive comments on these amendments that were circulated. A couple of things we're looking for comments on: examples of problems you've experienced in the past with growing food in the city. We also want to make sure that the review encompasses all of the London plan and zoning bylaw regulations which may impact growing, so we don't have to do this again. We want to make sure that it's fairly comprehensive and covers all of the particular regulations that have an impact on the process of growing. So we're looking at this point on more detailed comments on the draft changes that were included in the background study. And in the October meeting, we plan to come forward with sort of the final recommended London plan and zoning bylaw amendment changes that we'll be recommending to sort of encourage the growing of food within the city. And as I indicated, there's still other things that we can do that are a little more complex, dealing with other sorts of bylaws and city processes. And those may come through separate reviews and separate processes at some point in the future. So I want to thank you for listening, and I'm here to listen to what you have to say.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Chuck, for that really informative presentation. I don't see any questions in the chat currently. If anybody has one, though, you're welcome to post one in the chat, or you can take yourself off mute and ask. Okay, seeing none right now, feel free to continue posting them in the chat. There'll be time throughout the presentation. We're going to move on and we're going to watch one more video about urban agriculture that's currently happening in the city. So we're going to check out the Knowing and Growing Garden. The Knowing and Growing Garden is at the Western Fair. It's an initiative put on by the Grove. And yeah, if Deepika, you could play that video for us, please.
Hi everybody, welcome to the Knowing and Growing Garden at the Western Fair District, brought to you by the Grove 365 and generously supported by the fine folks at Libro Credit Union. So let's take a little gander through here and we'll kind of show you what we're all up to. We started this idea because urban ag is kind of a big thing in the city, and we're trying to get people involved with the education, learning how to do it, and just a basic enjoyment of the outdoor environment. So what we did here is we took a bunch of outdoor spaces that we really weren't using for anything except cutting grass. We jammed them full of a whole bunch of planters, stuck a bunch of vegetables in them, and invited a whole bunch of outdoor kind of people to come in here and give us a bit of direction as to what we do. So between Fanshawe College providing us with a lot of the plant material, we've got a lot of providers coming in for other materials such as potting mixes and triple mixes from Fisher Topsoil, very graciously recommended. We can go along here and take a look at some of the stuff that was provided by Carolinian Canada and by St. William's Nurseries down towards Lake Erie. Got a lot of good Carolinian zone plantings that are using this space really well. And we've actually been lucky enough to have growing chefs in here to help to educate kids on using unused spaces and to show them how to grow their own crops. So we've got a lot of neat things in here, things like eggplants, peppers, you've got tomatoes, you've got atypical things over here, such as your Jerusalem artichokes, some common junipers, all kinds of stuff that we're trying to teach you how you can glean your own stuff, how you can grow your own stuff, and how you can use more or less any type of old beat up planters or old remained materials to make your own planters, and there's benefits to both those things. So yeah, come on and take a look down here what we've got going on. We had a batch of bunnies living in here last week. Sadly, no longer with us. This is one of the ins and outs of having an outdoor garden. I think we have cats and rabbits and everything running around in here, and you just never know how to control the populations. So we've had to set up little barriers down here to keep critters out. We've learned that groundhogs are not terribly good climbers. So we got lots of snow fence on the go to keep them at bay with a little bit of luck. Haven't had a huge amount of luck, as you can see by the kale. So yeah, there's potatoes. Cleaning up things that are left around. And yeah, things like sumac, teaching people how you can use things, roadside plants like sumac. And we've got all sorts of stuff like bee balm, other stuff that you can cook with, mulberries. Anyway, yeah, we just tried to find a use for a space that didn't have a whole lot of use, and now we're bringing in groups to kind of show them how that goes. So please stop by our Knowing and Growing Garden, stop by the fairgrounds. We have food forests all over, planters that you can take a look at. And we're just happy to see you back.
Awesome. So yeah, that was the Knowing and Growing Garden at Western Fair. Great to see a lot of the some growing pains that they're having, but also lots of success with their garden and their journey in urban agriculture. So, not seeing any questions, we're going to move on to our breakout session, so our interactive part of this forum. So we're going to discuss the making urban agriculture easier strategy in small groups. And I'd like to thank our facilitators. We have a couple volunteers here from Len, Diane Solar, and Peter Model. Also Susan Smith from the Middlesex-London Food Policy Council, and myself. So we are going to have 3 groups of about 5 people, and your facilitator can introduce themselves when we get into our group, and then they will share their screen. And as a group, you can just have discussions and work through the fill-in, like you'll have like a working worksheet that you can fill out together and take notes on your discussion. And when we come back to the group, we'll just kind of, each group can report back what they discussed. So you should see a little window pop up on your screen that just says you can enter your breakout room.
And if anyone's not seeing a room or not seeing the option to join a room, let me know. Sometimes it depends on the version of Zoom that you have.
There's one question that came up in our meeting that was kind of interesting, and maybe Ellen can help us from the London Middlesex Health Unit. It was what's required when somebody wants to sell food in terms of approval and making sure that the food is actually suitable to eat. I was unsure of what the process is for doing that, but maybe Ellen can help us with that.
Well, it would fall under the public health guidelines in terms of whatever applies in a farmer's market or in any of those other jurisdictions. I would think is it's similar, but I mean they don't inspect. They wouldn't be able to. The health inspectors wouldn't be able to go out and inspect every household that's selling produce. I would imagine that they'll have to put through some kind of or maybe that already exists. I'm not really sure, but it would need to go through our environmental health people. And I don't think the restrictions are that if it's for fresh fruits and vegetables, really what are the problems are things that are prepared, right? So if you're making stuff with it, then there are a whole different set of guidelines when the hands get involved. But and when you're cooking it, or you have to cook it, or you're involving meat, or those kinds of things, or But when it comes to fresh produce, there's definitely fewer regulations involved. But I don't think that would be a difficult question for our environmental health people to answer. I'm sure that's probably pretty well laid out somewhere, that I don't have it at the tips of my fingertips because that's not the area I work in. But I would imagine that those guidelines already probably exist, and they would be similar to what's being used for farmers markets and farm gate sales out in the county mostly. But we do have a few farm gate sales that are currently happening in the city as well.
Okay, thanks, Ellen.
Some of those I believe are provincial as well, Chuck. I think some of it comes through OMAFRA, I believe. Diane's nodding her head. Yeah, so I think there are different levels in the Ministry of Agriculture and Food, OMAFRA. So yeah, it would vary depending on how it's sold and what is sold and where it's sold.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Sounds like there was a great discussion in all of the breakout rooms. So we're just going to ask each of the facilitators to share back briefly here with the full group. And we're also, as you know, collecting all the feedback as a whole and providing that to Chuck and to the city as feedback on the report. So just a few maybe high level shares. Peter, would you like to start with our group here?
Sure, thanks, Jessica. So for our first question, what were some examples of issues we faced with urban agriculture in London? A couple of these, some thoughts were too many rules. Growing food should really be easy for everybody to do. So that was one of them. And then just creating some more awareness around foodscaping and using public city lands to create food for the community. And removing barriers from selling local produce and food. So part of the foodscaping one was just making sure there's awareness about the different options available to landowners in the city and the different native plants that we have here and what you can source from these. So some examples are the serviceberry tree that's often planted within city streets now, just knowing that that berry is edible and available for everyone to use. So just getting some more awareness around native plants and things that are grown here in Ontario. For our second question, we looked at barrier 1. Agriculture isn't clearly permitted within urban areas of London. So we need to know some thoughts from our group, or need to know not just where we can do these, but also knowing that there's a will. The other barriers will be addressed as well. So not only that urban agriculture is permitted, but knowing that the city is going to address some of these other issues as well, financial, legal, in terms of that. And then defining urban agriculture. So what actually is urban agriculture? Does hydroponics and indoor growing count as that as well? We spent a lot of time on that one and just briefly went over barrier 3. A zoning bylaw that severely restricts where greenhouses are permitted in urban areas. So we just wanted to make sure that greenhouse sizes are known and all the variables related to establishing a greenhouse. So where it can be set up, maybe in relation to a property line, what they can be made out of, which I think is sort of related to another barrier there, like the shipping crate, and knowing where they can be built. So those are kind of the main issues that the feedback that we got for the couple barriers there.
Great, thanks, Peter. And Diane, could you share back from your group, please?
Yes, I didn't have the notes. Pardon me, Diane, I was in group 2.
Sorry, Diane. I meant Diane Stoller.
Group 3. Anyway, I think she's looking to me, and sequentially, you're next. So in our group, interestingly, we had someone from the city, from the Food Council, a couple of pioneers in urban ag, and someone from the county. So that made for a brief but full conversation. So I have to separate some of the points made and put them into the respective barriers. So I'm just going to speak to it from the perspective of problems and lack of clarity on a few things. So I'll type up the notes after the session. So our first topic, we actually talked about chickens, which we know is not on the city's urban ag agenda. And animals really was not the focus tonight so much as, growing food. So chickens has been debated in the past, and, there are a lot of opinions formulated that London hasn't come to a final decision on that. It has essentially not included it in some of the urban ag conversations, given past feedback. So there's interest to see year-round food forests. There are things that exist in other communities that we should be looking at. Pam was involved with community gardens, and so there are obviously things that changed once the city took that on. And Boys and Girls Club also was very involved with growing food. So what really we saw is that growing food doesn't need to be a chore. It needs to be a lifestyle. It needs to be a type of value that we have. It's necessary for the future to grow our own food, whether it's in our backyard or if we're in an apartment or something with other community members. And so we should look at it as more than a hobby, that it's something that we need more awareness on to demonstrate that it's something of value to everyone and is important given climate change. Just have to read my writing here. Essentially, also the fact that our homes are really sort of set up for us to be consumers. So we need to turn that around as well so that it's easier for us to grow our own food in our own backyard. One example was the psychiatric hospital in terms of not being clear about what the process was, having different government levels involved, having different kinds of charrettes and different things with the public giving input, but then challenges in terms of finding out exactly what would happen and so forth. So a very large open property that had huge potential, but the food growing has not really been the result at this time anyway. We wanted to thank Charles for a comprehensive report. It's giving people a lot to think about. And we, in our breakout, have a responsibility to share that document with others so you can get more input. So I think that's basically it. It's a comprehensive, complicated topic that we have to somehow make easier for people to understand and participate with. I think that's it.
Well put, Diane. Absolutely. Really resonated with that growing food is more than a hobby comment. I think it's an action that we can take that says a lot and contributes a lot to our resiliency individually and as a community. So definitely a lot to think about. And for the last breakout room, Susan, will you share it with us, please?
Yeah, I'll talk. So we were lucky enough to have Chuck in our group, kind of the expert of all of this. So we all kind of asked some individual questions as well. But something that we focused on was the fact that all of these amendments are great, and making urban agriculture more common in London will be an amazing thing for our community. But one thing we really need to focus on is how we're doing it. So we need to ensure that like what we're doing isn't interfering with our neighbors. So just making sure that there's like working with the Middlesex-London Health Unit and different organizations in the city, making sure that there are regulations on like the size of gardens, the size of greenhouses. If we start using containers to grow food, how we can just ensure that there's regulations on these things so that they don't become like eyesores per to say in different communities. And then also working with like the Middlesex-London Health Unit to ensure that food is grown in practical and sustainable ways, making sure that the people who want to grow food in their backyards, or organizations who want to have large scale gardens or greenhouses, know how to do it safely. So if that means if they need to get a soil test before they start growing food, like where they need to go to get this done. So that's kind of what we focused on, the more practical, how will this happen and what do people need to kind of get started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, everyone. Can't wait to see all of the feedback consolidated together. And then we just have a couple quick features that we'd like to share, and then we'll wrap up. So I'll pass it on to Lella for our next feature here.
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Jessica, for putting this up, this slide up. So I wanted to share this information about the Southwest Ontario Aboriginal Health Access Centre. So the photos and the info come from Ramona Dunn. Ramona's a registered nurse, and she's a diabetes care coordinator with SOHAC in London. And I remember her mentioning this garden at she's also on the Middlesex-London Food Policy Council. I remember her mentioning this garden at one of our meetings, and just the positive impact it was having on her clients. And so I asked her if we could share some information about it tonight, and she graciously said yes. So this is a garden that is right in place right behind SOHAC, which is on William Street here in London. And you can see from the slide, the main focus of it is to start a garden group. And the garden group consists basically of SOHAC clients who are either have diabetes, they're living with diabetes, or they have a family member who's living with diabetes, or they're interested in preventing it. And diet, of course, is a big piece of that. So they started this traditional food and medicine garden in behind SOHAC, and you can see, of course, there's some beautiful vegetables in these pictures, and also in the middle picture at the bottom, you can see just lovely sweetgrass and a gorgeous sage in the background as well. So part of this garden is, of course, combining just learning about diet and learning about gardening with some of the traditional medicines of Indigenous communities. So it's about connecting to the land. It's about the link between ourselves as human beings and the plants that grow around us, and tending to those and stewarding them. And so it's a very practical, hands-on, literally, project that clients participate in. They learn how to garden, and they also take home really good fresh food. So it improves access to fresh, homegrown vegetables, and passes that traditional knowledge down from one generation to the other. So it's got so many benefits. So we really wanted to highlight this as an example of the impact that an activity like growing food can have. And as we were just saying, right, this is definitely not a hobby. This is learning. This is health related. This is so many things. So we really wanted to focus some attention on this garden as an example. And I'll pass it back to you, Jessica, for our last presentation.
Beautiful. So then the last one is from Urban Roots. Many of you may have had a chance to visit London's Urban Farm. located on 21 Norland Ave, just off Highbury, Highbury and Hamilton. If you haven't been there, it's right on the TVP bike path. There are regular farm gate sales. You can buy lots of fresh veggies, fresh seedlings at the beginning of the season. So Deepika, can you cue up that video for us, please?
Miriam, and this is Jacob, and we are on the Board of Directors for Urban Roots London.
Urban Roots is a not-for-profit urban farm which is dedicated to revitalizing underused land within city limits for agricultural purposes in order to grow and distribute high-quality, organically grown local produce.
We focus on growing, but we also try and connect with the community in as many ways as possible. That includes both distributing our food as well as educational opportunities and having folks come out to the farm itself to participate.
Urban Roots believes that the community is an important aspect to food security and food dignity. So we partner with as many organizations and businesses as we can, from local restaurants to food-based social enterprises to community development partners like food banks and shelters in order to provide our produce. Because we believe that the roots of our food and the roots of our community grow best when they grow together.
That is very exciting news, what Lala just put in the chat. I had no idea about that, so really cool. Second Urban Roots location coming up north. So yeah, that's all we had on the agenda today. Just going to wrap up by saying the next steps for this work are, like we've said, we're going to provide all of the feedback that you've all shared tonight with Chuck and the City of London. And like Chuck said, then the next step with the city is this will be presented at a Planning Environment Committee in October. So that's a public meeting. You would all be welcome to attend and continue to provide feedback. As well, any more feedback on the report from yourselves or anybody within your network that you think might be interested in looking at the report and providing some information. This session has been recorded, so you could feel free to send along the video or just the report itself. And feedback is welcome by email to Chuck. I don't know if we have his email in the chat yet. But maybe somebody could put that in. And we would hope to get feedback to Chuck by the end of August. So by the end of this month, that would be very much appreciated.
Jessica, my email is cparker@london.ca.
Got it. Thank you.
Instead of doing it through a chat, it's a little more efficient this way. But yeah, anything you can send to me at cparker@london.ca.
Awesome. Thanks.
Either as a group or individually, it doesn't matter.
Easy to remember, easy to do. Yeah, thank you. Oh, perfect. There it is. Yep. So that's it. If you have any questions, you can feel free to reach out to us at the MLFPC. And hopefully we will see you continuing to stay engaged with this process. Thank you so much to Chuck for your presentation tonight, to the facilitators, and for everybody for joining in. This has been great.
Yeah, thank you everybody for your time.
Thanks, everyone.